The small town of Oak Ridge woke as it always did, sprinklers ticking across manicured lawns, screen doors creaking open for the morning paper. But at exactly 7:45 a.m., Eleanor Jenkins paused while watering her petunias, her arthritis-gnarled hand frozen mid-air. Down Maple Street came the most extraordinary sight in their otherwise ordinary town. 8-year-old Emma Whitaker walked with her chin up, blonde pigtails catching the morning light. But it wasn't the child who made Mrs. Jenkins catch her breath. It was the 6 massive German shepherds moving in perfect formation around her. The dogs' tongues lolled from their mouths, yet their amber eyes remained vigilant, scanning every doorway, every parked car, every shadowed corner. "There she goes again," muttered Mr. Peterson from next door. "Someone ought to do something about those beasts." Mrs. Jenkins shook her head slowly. "Those aren't just pets, Henry. Those are sentinels keeping a promise to a dead man." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Emma Whitaker had not always been the solemn child who walked through Oak Ridge with an honor guard of canines. Before 6 months ago, she had been like any other second grader, laughing on the playground, collecting sparkly erasers, begging for ice cream after dinner. But that was before the accident, before her father, Major Robert "Bobby" Whitaker, former Special Forces and decorated war hero, had disappeared on a fishing trip, his boat found splintered against the rocks of Jefferson Point with no body recovered. Sarah Whitaker worked double shifts at Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital, her nurse's scrubs often still on when she fell asleep on the couch. At 36, grief had carved new lines around her eyes. She loved her daughter fiercely, but struggled to understand the bond between Emma and the 6 German shepherds that her husband had trained with military precision before his death. The dogs had always been Bobby's project. He'd acquired them as puppies 4 years ago, after his final deployment. Commander was the unquestioned alpha steel gray, with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand human speech. Shadow, with his black coat, could disappear into darkness and reappear without warning. Ranger, whose nose could detect the faintest sense, had a distinctive white blaze on his chest. Duchess, the only female, was lean and quick, her protective instincts especially strong toward Emma. Scout, the smallest but fastest, had one ear that flopped forward while the other stood straight. And Titan, massive even by German shepherd standards, brought up the rear of their formation, a living wall of muscle and loyalty. The town of Oak Ridge. Virginia had mixed feelings about the Whitaker dogs. Some, like Eleanor Jenkins, saw their devotion as something almost sacred. Others, like Principal Patterson at Oak Ridge Elementary, considered them a liability and a disruption. The school board had already held 2 emergency meetings about the dog situation. What no one in town knew, not even Sarah, was that Bobby Whitaker's death had been no accident. No one knew that before he disappeared. He had spent countless hours teaching Emma special commands, whispered words that would direct the dogs in scenarios he prayed would never come. No one understood that every morning, when those 6 dogs surrounded one small girl, they were fulfilling the final order of their master: protect her, they're coming. Principal Elaine Patterson's sensible heels clicked across the polished linoleum as she approached the playground fence, where 6 German shepherds lay in a semicircle, watching a blonde, pigtailed girl on the swings. "Mrs. "Whitaker," she said into her cell phone, her voice tight with practiced patience. "This is the third time this week. The school board has been very accommodating considering your situation. But I cannot have 6 large dogs on school property. The liability alone—" Sarah Whitaker's exhausted voice came through the speaker. "I understand, Mrs. Patterson, truly. But they won't leave her. We've tried everything." "Well, try harder," Principal Patterson snapped, immediately regretting her tone. She softened. "Sarah, I know it's been difficult since Bobby passed, but these dogs are disrupting the entire school. Parents are calling. The Stevenson boy is terrified of dogs after being bitten last year." As if on cue, Commander's ears perked up. The massive gray shepherd turned his intelligent gaze toward the principal, regarding her with an almost human assessment. A shiver ran down Patterson's spine. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Sarah sighed. "I just got off my shift." The principal watched as 3 fourth-grade boys approached Emma on the playground. The dog's posture changed instantly, not aggressive, but alert. Muscles tensed beneath thick fur. One of the boys, Tyler Collins, the known schoolyard bully, reached out to tug one of Emma's pigtails before his hand made contact. Scout, the smallest, fastest shepherd, was on his feet, a low warning rumble in his throat. Tyler froze, then backed away slowly. The dogs settled once more. "They're not dangerous," Emma had explained countless times in her small, serious voice. "They just don't like mean people." That afternoon, Sarah arrived at school with dark circles under her eyes. Her hospital scrubs wrinkled from her 12-hour shift. At 36, she looked a decade older, grief and exhaustion etching premature lines around her mouth. "I don't know what else to do," she admitted, watching Emma reading on a bench, the dogs arrayed around her like sentinels. "Bobby trained them. They only respond to his commands or Emma's. Have you considered—" Principal Patterson hesitated. "Finding them new homes separately." Sarah's laugh held no humor. "We tried, after the funeral. My brother took Shadow, 12 miles away. Shadow was back before morning, scratching at Emma's window." She rubbed her temples. "We tried again with Duchess. Same result. It's like they made a promise to Bobby." Across the playground, Billy Thompson, a shy boy with thick glasses, approached Emma hesitantly. The dogs observed but remained calm as he sat beside her, showing her something in a book. It was the first time Patterson had seen Emma smile in weeks. As Sarah and the principal talked, neither noticed the dark sedan that cruised slowly past the school, the driver's eyes lingering on the girl and her canine guardians. That evening, as Emma performed her nightly ritual of feeding the dogs each with their own bowl, arranged in a precise semicircle in the backyard, plus a 7th bowl set apart. For when Daddy comes home, she noticed something different about Commander's collar. A small bulge that hadn't been there before. With small, careful fingers, she explored the inside of the sturdy leather, finding a folded scrap of paper tucked into a hidden pocket. Her heart hammered as she recognized her father's cramped handwriting. "The 7th bowl holds more than food. Dig deep, ladybug." Emma glanced around to make sure her mother wasn't watching from the kitchen window. Sarah didn't understand about the dogs, about the silent messages they sometimes carried. With Bobby's nickname for her ladybug burning in her mind, Emma slipped the note into her pocket. That night, after her mother had fallen asleep on the couch, another late movie keeping her company through the lonely hours, Emma crept into the backyard. The dogs followed silently, forming a protective circle as she knelt beside the seventh bowl, the one that had remained empty since Bobby disappeared. She dug into the soft earth beneath it, her fingers soon striking something solid. A small waterproof container emerged from the dirt, the kind her father had always used for his camping trips. Inside was a folded piece of paper with a strange series of letters and numbers, and a small key across town. Sheriff Frank Sullivan sat at his kitchen table. Bobby Whitaker's accident report spread before him. Something about the splintered boat, the missing body, the timing of it all had never sat right with him. Bobby had been a strong swimmer, knew those waters better than anyone, and just 2 days before his accident, Bobby had visited Frank, asking odd questions about jurisdiction over federal crimes. The sheriff's coffee had long gone cold when his phone rang. "Sullivan," he answered gruffly. "It's about the Whitaker case," said a voice he didn't recognize. "You need to look closer at the foundation." "Who is this?" Sullivan demanded. But the line had already gone dead. The next morning, as Emma waited for the school bus, the 6 shepherds arranged around her as always. She noticed Scout's behavior change. The dog's ears flattened. His gaze fixed on a man walking on the opposite side of the street, a stranger in a town where faces were familiar. The man smiled pleasantly, tipping his hat at Emma. But all 6 dogs shifted subtly, positioning themselves between Emma and the stranger. "Easy," Emma whispered, using one of her father's commands. The dogs relaxed marginally but remained vigilant until the man turned the corner. When the bus arrived, the driver, Mr. Reynolds, sighed at the familiar sight. "Dogs, stay outside. Emma, school rules." Emma nodded solemnly, but as she climbed the steps, the dogs remained exactly where they were, not entering the bus, but not leaving either. They would be waiting when the bus returned, as they had been every day since Bobby's death. What Emma didn't see was Shadow slipping away from the group, following the stranger's path around the corner, a silent ghost tracking potential danger, just as Bobby had trained him to do. In the classroom, Emma's teacher, Ms. Bennett, watched the little girl with concern. Once a bright, engaged student, Emma now moved through her days with a solemn purpose that was unsettling in a child so young. During recess, while other children played, Emma would sit alone, writing in a small notebook, occasionally glancing up to check that her canine guardians remained at their posts beyond the fence. "She's processing grief in her own way," the school counselor had explained. The dogs were her father's, and now they're her connection to him. But what none of the adults understood was that Emma wasn't just grieving, she was preparing. Every night, she studied the strange codes her father had left her. Every day, she practiced the special commands he had taught her, because somehow, in her 8-year-old heart, Emma knew what the adults refused to see. Her father hadn't left her unprotected. And the 6 dogs weren't just pets. They were messengers, guardians, and the key to understanding why Bobby Whitaker had really disappeared. Emma waited until her mother's breathing deepened into sleep before slipping from beneath her covers. Commander, who always slept at the foot of her bed, rose silently and followed as she tiptoed to her closet. The other 5 dogs, arranged around the perimeter of her room like furry sentinels, remained motionless except for their eyes, which tracked her movement through the darkness. The small key from beneath the 7th bowl fit perfectly into the lock of her father's old tackle box, which Emma had rescued from the garage after her mother had packed away most of Bobby's belongings. Inside, beneath fishing lures and tangled line, Emma found what she was looking for, a sealed envelope with, "For Ladybug, if I die," written in her father's bold handwriting. Her small hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside were several pages covered in Bobby's familiar scrawl, along with hand-drawn diagrams of the dogs in various positions and a list of commands Emma had never heard before. "My brave Ladybug," the letter began. "If you're reading this, something has happened to me, but I made sure you wouldn't be alone. Commander, Shadow, Ranger, Duchess, Scout, and Titan aren't just dogs. They're your protectors now." Emma's heart pounded as she read on, her father's words painting a picture very different from the fishing accident her mother had described. "There are people who might come looking for something they think I have. Trust the dogs. They know who's safe and who isn't. Remember our special game of codes? The back of this letter has everything you need to talk to the dogs in ways only you will understand." A floorboard creaked in the hallway. In an instant, Shadow was at the bedroom door, his posture alert but not alarmed. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face softening at the sight of her daughter surrounded by Bobby's dogs. "Another nightmare, honey?" she asked, voice rough with sleep. Emma quickly slid the letter under her pillow. "I'm okay, Mom." Sarah entered, navigating carefully around Titan's massive form. She sat on the edge of the bed, gently brushing Emma's hair back from her forehead. "I know you miss him," she whispered. "I do too." For a moment, Emma considered showing her mother the letter, the codes, the key. But something in her father's words, "Trust no one completely," held her back. "The dogs help," Emma said simply. Sarah's eyes filled with complicated emotions. "I know they do, sweetie. But Principal Patterson called again today. The school board is having a special meeting tomorrow night about whether the dogs can keep coming to school with you." Commander's ears pricked up at the concern in Sarah's voice. He moved closer to Emma, his warm weight pressing against her side. "They have to stay with me," Emma insisted, a note of panic rising in her voice. "Daddy said Daddy's gone. Emma." Sarah interrupted, more sharply than she intended. Seeing her daughter's face crumple, she softened immediately. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm just tired. We'll figure something out, okay?" After Sarah returned to bed, Emma pulled out the letter again, studying the commands and signals her father had outlined. According to Bobby's instructions, each dog had been trained for specific situations. Commander was the leader, making tactical decisions. Shadow specialized in reconnaissance. Ranger could detect explosives and other dangers. Duchess was the primary defender. Scout was the messenger, the fastest of the pack, and Titan was the last line of defense, physically the strongest. With growing amazement, Emma realized her father had created not just pets, but a coordinated team designed with one purpose: to protect her. The next morning, Emma awoke to the sound of unfamiliar voices downstairs. The dogs were instantly alert. Commander and Shadow slipping out of the bedroom while the others maintained their positions around Emma. Pulling on her robe, Emma crept to the top of the stairs. In the living room stood her mother, still in her nightgown, facing a tall man in a crisp suit. His back was to Emma, but something about his posture made Commander, who had positioned himself between the stranger and the staircase, let out a low, warning growl. "I was Bobby's closest friend in the unit, Sarah," the man was saying, his voice smooth and reasonable. "I know how much those dogs meant to him. I'm just offering to help. Military-trained animals need specialized handling." "I appreciate that. Marcus," Sarah replied, sounding uncertain. "But they're so attached to Emma. I'm not sure separating them would be good for her right now." Of course. The man, Marcus, nodded sympathetically. Bobby always said Emma had a way with them. But 6 German shepherds. That's a lot for anyone to handle, especially a single mom working your hours. As if sensing Emma's presence, Marcus turned toward the stairs. His face was handsome in a forgettable way, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You must be Emma," he said. "Your dad told me all about you." The reaction from the dogs was immediate and alarming. Commander's growl deepened. Shadow appeared at the far side of the room as if from nowhere. And upstairs, the remaining 4 dogs moved to surround Emma protectively. "The dogs don't like him," Emma stated flatly. Sarah looked embarrassed. "Emma Marcus was your father's friend." But Emma remembered her father's words. They know who's safe and who isn't. And the dogs had never reacted this way to any of Bobby's other military friends who had visited after the funeral. Marcus's smile tightened slightly. "Military working dogs can be territorial. May I?" He reached into his pocket slowly, pulling out what looked like a dog treat. Commander's growl became more pronounced. "Perhaps another time," Marcus said smoothly, returning the treat to his pocket. "I'll leave my card. Sarah, call me when you're ready to discuss options for the dogs." After he left, Sarah turned to Emma with exasperation. "Emma, that was rude. Marcus just wants to help." "Daddy never mentioned anyone named Marcus," Emma said firmly. "And the dogs don't trust him. They're dogs, Emma, not mind readers." Sarah's voice rose with stress. "The school board is meeting tonight. Principal Patterson is talking about involving animal control. I'm trying to find solutions." That night, after her mother left for the school board meeting, Emma took out her father's letter again. The coded instructions at the back were complex, but Bobby had been teaching Emma codes and puzzles since she was 5. It was their special game. After an hour of work, she deciphered the first message: "Shed lockbox blue key under Commander's bed." Heart racing. Emma slipped into the backyard with all 6 dogs forming a protective circle around her. The old garden shed still contained many of Bobby's tools and equipment that Sarah hadn't had the heart to clear out. Under the dog bed Commander used when they spent time in the shed, Emma found a small blue key taped inside one of the metal legs. The key opened a lockbox hidden behind a false panel in the shed wall. Inside was a phone, a thick folder of documents, and another letter. "If you've found this, things are worse than I hoped." Her father's handwriting began, "Someone is coming. Ladybug. Someone who thinks I have information that could hurt them. The truth is, I do. The rest of the letter contained details that made little sense to Emma. Something about a group called the Foundation that Bobby had discovered was using humanitarian missions as cover for illegal weapons sales in Afghanistan. Bobby had collected evidence, but before he could bring it to the proper authorities, he'd realized he was being watched. "I've made arrangements to protect you and your mother," the letter continued. "The dogs are part of that protection. If Marcus Reynolds approaches you, do not trust him. He works for them." Emma's blood ran cold. Marcus, the man who had been in their living room just hours ago. At that moment, Commander's posture changed. His ears pricked forward, his body tensing. Shadow and Scout moved toward the shed door while Ranger, Duchess, and Titan tightened their circle around Emma. Through the small shed window, Emma saw headlights pulling into their driveway. Her mother wasn't due back for at least another hour. Commander gave a soft woof, the alert signal Bobby had trained into him. Someone was coming, and according to her father's warning, they weren't safe. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as she watched the unfamiliar black SUV idle in their driveway. Commander's muscles tensed beneath his thick fur, a low rumble building in his throat. She quickly gathered her father's documents, stuffing them into her backpack before slipping out the shed's back door, the 6 dogs moving in perfect formation around her. "Kitchen door," she whispered to Commander. One of the basic commands her father had taught her years ago. The massive gray shepherd immediately adjusted course, leading the pack toward the house's rear entrance. Once inside, Emma locked the door and peered through the window. 2 men in dark suits were approaching the front door. Neither was Marcus. But something about their methodical movements reminded her of the way her father and his military friends carried themselves. "Find," Emma whispered to Shadow, using one of the commands from her father's letter. The black shepherd immediately slipped away, moving silently through the darkened house to reconnoiter. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime incongruous with the tension filling the house. Emma remained frozen in the kitchen, Titan and Duchess positioning themselves protectively in front of her, while Commander took up a position with a clear view of both the front and back entrances. Shadow returned moments later, pressing his body against Emma's leg, the signal her father's notes had described as strangers, not immediate threat. Still, Emma remained hidden as the men rang the doorbell twice more before returning to their vehicle. She watched through the curtains as they sat in the driveway for several long minutes before finally driving away. Only when the SUV's taillights had disappeared down Maple Street did Emma release the breath she'd been holding. She pulled out her father's letter again, studying the special whistle commands he had documented. According to Bobby, these sounds were inaudible to human ears at a distance, but would allow her to communicate with the dogs without spoken words. Emma spent the next hour practicing the whistle patterns, one for come, another for danger, a third for hide. The dogs responded instantly to each signal, their training evident in their precise movements. When Sarah's car finally pulled into the driveway, Emma quickly hid the documents before running to the door, the dogs falling into formation around her. Sarah's expression was grim as she entered. "The school board meeting was a disaster," she said, dropping her purse on the counter. "Half the parents want the dogs banned from school property. The other half think they're keeping all the children safer." She ran a hand through her hair. "Principal Patterson is giving us 1 more week to find a solution before she involves animal control." "Mom, there were men here," Emma said urgently. "In a black car. They rang the doorbell. Sarah's exhaustion gave way to alarm. "What? When? Why didn't you call me?" "I was scared," Emma admitted. "But the dogs protected me. I stayed hidden like Daddy taught me." A flicker of something frustration, perhaps, or worry crossed Sarah's face at the mention of Bobby's lessons. "Emma, honey, I know you miss your father, but some of the things he taught you, they were from his military days. We're not in danger here in Oak Ridge." Emma opened her mouth to tell her mother about Marcus, about the foundation, about the document she'd found. But the warning in her father's letter stopped her. "Trust no one completely, not even those you love. They can be used against you." Instead, she simply said, "The dogs knew the men weren't safe." Sarah knelt down, taking Emma's small hands in hers. "Sweetie, the dogs are amazing, but they're still just animals. They can't tell good people from bad." Commander, as if understanding the conversation, moved to Emma's side and fixed Sarah with his intelligent gaze. For a moment, Sarah seemed unsettled by the dog's focused attention. "Let's get you to bed," she said finally. "It's been a long day." That night, Emma lay awake long after her mother had gone to sleep. The dogs arranged around her room in their usual protective formation. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Someone is coming." The men in the SUV. Marcus's unexpected visit. It was all happening just as Bobby had predicted. The next morning brought another surprise. As Emma and Sarah ate breakfast, a knock came at the door. Commander and Shadow immediately moved to alert positions while the other dogs gathered around Emma. Sarah opened the door to find Sheriff Frank Sullivan standing on their porch, his weathered face creased with concern. "Morning, Sarah," he said, tipping his hat. "Mind if I come in for a minute?" The dogs relaxed slightly at the sheriff's presence, another good sign, according to her father's notes. Bobby had written that Frank Sullivan was one of the few people in town who could be trusted completely. "What brings you by, Frank?" Sarah asked, pouring him a cup of coffee. The sheriff's eyes flickered to Emma before returning to Sarah. "Just following up on a few things about Bobby's accident. Some new information has come to light." Sarah glanced meaningfully at Emma. "Maybe we should discuss this later." "Actually," Sheriff Sullivan said gently, "I'd like to ask Emma something, if that's all right." Emma sat up straighter, suddenly feeling important. The sheriff had never asked for her input before. "Emma," he began, his voice kind but serious. "Did your dad ever mention something called the Foundation to you?" The question sent a jolt through Emma's body. Commander, sensing her reaction, pressed closer to her side. "Frank," Sarah interjected. "She's 8 years old, whatever investigation you're conducting." "It's okay, Mom," Emma said quietly. She turned to the sheriff. "He didn't tell me about it, but I found a letter." Sarah's face paled. "What letter, Emma? What are you talking about?" Before Emma could answer, the sound of a car pulling into their driveway silenced the conversation. Through the window, Emma saw Marcus Reynolds emerging from a sleek black sedan, his smile as practiced and cold as it had been the day before. The reaction from the dogs was immediate and unmistakable. Commander's hackles rose, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. Shadow slipped into the shadows of the hallway. While Ranger positioned himself between Emma and the front door, Duchess and Scout flanked Emma on either side, with Titan bringing up the rear of their defensive formation. "Sarah," Sheriff Sullivan said quietly, his hand moving subtly toward his holster. "Do you know that man?" "That's Marcus Reynolds," Sarah replied, confused by both the sheriff's reaction and the dog's behavior. "He was in Bobby's unit. He came by yesterday offering to help with the dogs." The sheriff's expression hardened. "Sarah, there was no Marcus Reynolds in Bobby's unit. I checked the roster myself yesterday." A heavy knock sounded at the door. "Sarah, it's Marcus. I brought those training resources I mentioned." Emma tugged urgently at Sheriff Sullivan's sleeve. "The shed," she whispered. "Daddy left proof in the shed." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Sheriff Sullivan had called for backup, keeping Marcus talking at the front door while Deputy Wilson circled around to the back of the house. Emma led Sarah to the shed, showing her the hidden compartment and the documents Bobby had left behind. Sarah's hands shook as she read through the evidence her husband had compiled: photographs, financial records, and a detailed report on how the Foundation, a supposedly humanitarian organization operating in conflict zones, was actually a front for illegal weapons sales to insurgent groups. "Bobby was going to report them," Sarah whispered, horror dawning on her face. "That's why he—" She couldn't finish the sentence, the reality of her husband's accident finally becoming clear. By afternoon, the Whitaker home had become the center of a quiet but intense law enforcement operation. FBI agents arrived from the Richmond field office, taking possession of Bobby's documents and interviewing Sarah at length. Emma sat in the kitchen with a kind female agent who specialized in working with children, the 6 dogs refusing to leave her side despite the agent's initial concerns about their presence. "Your dad trained these dogs really well," the agent commented, watching as Commander maintained his vigilant position by the door. "They're not just trained," Emma said solemnly. "They promised Daddy they'd protect me." That evening, as law enforcement finally cleared out of their home, Sarah sat Emma down in the living room, the dogs arranged around them in their usual protective circle. "Emma, honey," Sarah began, her voice gentle but serious, "I owe you an apology. I thought your father's precautions with the dogs were excessive. I didn't understand." Emma leaned against her mother's side. "Daddy knew the bad people might come?" Sarah nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, he did, and he made sure you would be safe." She stroked Commander's head with newfound respect. "The FBI says we need to be careful for a while longer. They're investigating the Foundation, but these are dangerous people." "What about Marcus?" Emma asked. "They're looking for him," Sarah assured her. "Sheriff Sullivan says they've put out an alert." But Marcus Reynolds had vanished as quickly as he had appeared. His rental car found abandoned at the Richmond airport, with no trace of where he might have gone. The next day brought a new challenge. Principal Patterson called an emergency meeting with Sarah, Sheriff Sullivan, and 2 FBI agents. Emma sat in the hallway outside the conference room, the dogs arranged protectively around her chair, while curious school staff walked wide circles around them. Inside, voices occasionally rose loud enough for Emma to hear snippets: security concerns, liability issues, protective custody. When Sarah finally emerged, her face was drawn but determined. "We're going to try something new," she told Emma. "The FBI has suggested we work with your teachers to arrange temporary homeschooling, just until things settle down." "The dogs can stay with me?" Emma asked. her primary concern evident. "Yes," Sarah assured her, a new understanding in her eyes. "The dogs stay with you." Over the next week, a new routine emerged. FBI agents maintained a subtle presence near their home. Emma's teacher, Ms. Bennett, came to the house each afternoon to provide lessons and assignments. The dogs adjusted their protective formation to accommodate these changes, always vigilant, but never interfering unless they sensed potential danger. The town of Oak Ridge, meanwhile, buzzed with rumors. Some neighbors kept their distance, uncomfortable with the law enforcement presence and the pack of German shepherds that continued to surround Emma whenever she ventured outside. Others, like Mrs. Jenkins, brought over casseroles and offered support. "Those dogs are a blessing," Mrs. Jenkins told Sarah one afternoon as they watched Emma playing in the backyard, the shepherds forming a perfect perimeter around her. Bobby knew what he was doing. "I just wish he had told me everything," Sarah replied softly. "Maybe then he wouldn't have had to face this alone. Men like Bobby, they carry the weight of the world on their shoulders," Mrs. Jenkins said, her old eyes wise with experience. "They think they're protecting us by keeping secrets, but sometimes secrets just create distance." On the 10th day after Sheriff Sullivan's visit, Commander's behavior changed. The great shepherd seemed restless, constantly checking the perimeter of the yard, his attention repeatedly drawn to the woods that bordered the back of their property. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah was startled by a soft whining at the back door. She found Commander there, his intelligent eyes fixed on her face, his body language clearly communicating that he wanted her to follow. Hesitantly, Sarah opened the door. Commander immediately trotted toward the shed, looking back to ensure she was following. Inside the shed, the dog went directly to a section of the wall that appeared unremarkable. "What is it, boy?" Sarah whispered, kneeling beside the shepherd. Commander pawed at the baseboard. Sarah, remembering the hidden compartment Emma had shown her, began carefully examining the wall. Behind a stack of gardening supplies, she discovered another hidden panel, this one containing a small fireproof safe. She didn't have the combination, but she photographed it with her phone before carefully replacing everything as she had found it. The next morning, she showed the picture to Emma. "Daddy's birthday, then your birthday, then their birthday," Emma said immediately. "Their birthday?" Sarah questioned. Emma pointed to the dogs. "The day Daddy brought them home, he always said it was their birthday." The combination worked. Inside the safe, Sarah found additional documents, a thumb drive, and a sealed envelope addressed to her in Bobby's handwriting. With trembling fingers, she opened it and began to read. "Sarah, my love," it began. "If you're reading this, then you know the truth about my work, about the foundation, and about the danger it has brought to our doorstep. I am so sorry for keeping this from you, but I thought I was protecting you and Emma by carrying this burden alone." The letter continued, explaining how Bobby had discovered the Foundation's illegal activities during his final deployment, how he had gathered evidence, and how he had realized they were on to him before he could bring the information to the proper authorities. "I've made arrangements to protect you both," he wrote. "The dogs are specially trained, not just military working dogs, but personal protection specialists. Each has been conditioned to recognize specific threats and to protect Emma at all costs. They will know friend from foe better than any security system." Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks as she continued reading. The final paragraphs contain specific instructions about safe houses, emergency contacts, and contingency plans, all centered around keeping Emma safe until the Foundation could be brought to justice. What the letter didn't contain, however, was any suggestion that Bobby had survived his accident. His preparations had been thorough, but made with the expectation that he would not be there to protect his family himself. That afternoon, Sheriff Sullivan visited again, bringing news that sent a chill through Sarah's body. "Marcus Reynolds has been spotted back in the area," he said gravely. "And he's not alone." As the sheriff detailed the security precautions being implemented, Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, her arms wrapped around Commander's thick neck, whispering into his fur. To Sarah, it looked like her daughter was simply seeking comfort from her beloved pet. But Emma was actually practicing the special whistle commands from her father's instructions, preparing for what she somehow knew was coming. That night, Sarah insisted Emma sleep in her room, the dogs arraying themselves around the bed in their protective formation. As darkness fell over Oak Ridge, 6 pairs of alert canine eyes remained open, watching, waiting. Their muscles tensed for the danger their training told them was approaching. What none of them knew was that 15 miles away, in a motel room just outside town limits, Marcus Reynolds was meticulously cleaning a weapon while speaking on a secure phone line. "The dogs are the problem," he was saying. "Whitaker trained them too well. We can't get close to the girl or the documents as long as they're in the picture." He paused, listening to instructions from the other end. "Understood. We move tomorrow night. The mother and child will be handled as collateral damage, unavoidable casualties." As he ended the call, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Bobby Whitaker had been clever, but no amount of canine protection could stand against what was coming. By this time tomorrow, the Foundation's secrets would be secure once more, and Emma Whitaker's guardians would be nothing but a tragic footnote in a small-town newspaper. The morning dawned with an unnatural stillness that set Sarah's nerves on edge. Emma had barely touched her breakfast, instead watching Commander, who remained stationed by the front window, his posture unusually rigid. The other dogs, typically rotating through their patrol patterns around the house, had tightened their formation, staying closer to Emma than normal. "They know something," Emma said quietly, her small hand resting on Duchess's head. Sarah was about to offer a reassurance when the phone rang. Sheriff Sullivan's grave voice confirmed her fears. "Sarah, we've got a situation. 2 men matching the description of Marcus's associates were spotted at the gas station on Route 16 this morning. FBI is sending additional agents, but they're coming from Richmond. I'm positioning deputies near your house, but I need you to be ready to move quickly if necessary." Sarah glanced at Emma, who was watching her with those solemn eyes that had aged decades in the past 6 months. "We'll be ready," Sarah promised, hanging up just as a knock sounded at the front door. Commander's reaction was immediate, a low, warning growl that Sarah had learned to trust. She motioned for Emma to stay back as she approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. On the porch stood Marcus Reynolds, dressed in an official-looking suit, complete with an ID badge clipped to his lapel. Next to him stood a woman in similar attire. "Mrs. Whitaker?" Marcus called through the door, his voice professionally pleasant. "I'm here representing the Department of Defense. We need to speak with you regarding your husband's service records." Sarah backed away from the door, grabbing her phone to call Sheriff Sullivan. Before she could dial, Emma tugged at her sleeve. "Mom!" she whispered urgently, pointing toward the kitchen window. Through the glass, Sarah could see a third person moving along the side of the house. "Upstairs," Sarah whispered, grabbing the emergency bag she'd prepared following the FBI's instructions. "Now!" Emma moved with a practiced efficiency that broke Sarah's heart. No child should be so accustomed to emergency evacuations. The dogs moved with them, Shadow and Scout taking point up the stairs while Titan and Ranger created a barrier behind them. In Sarah's bedroom, Commander went straight to the window overlooking the backyard, his ears alert. Outside, 2 more men were approaching the back door. "They're surrounding us," Sarah realized, her voice tight with fear as she dialed Sheriff Sullivan. The sheriff answered immediately. "Sarah, we're 3 minutes out." "They're already here," Sarah interrupted. "5 of them. Marcus is at the front door." "Get to the safe room," Sullivan ordered. "We're coming in hot." The safe room was Bobby's home office, which he had retrofitted with a reinforced door and basic supplies. Sarah had thought it paranoid when he installed it 2 years ago. Now, she was profoundly grateful. As they moved toward the office, the sound of breaking glass came from downstairs, someone forcing entry through the back door. Commander made a soft, distinctive sound that Emma recognized from her father's training notes. "Mom," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "The dogs need to split up." "What? No, Emma. We need to stay together." "It's part of Daddy's plan," Emma insisted. "Commander, Shadow, and Duchess will stay with us. The others need to create a distraction." Before Sarah could object, Emma gave a complex whistle pattern. Immediately, Ranger, Scout, and Titan broke away, moving down the hallway toward the staircase while the remaining 3 dogs herded Sarah and Emma into the office. The sounds that followed were chaotic, barking, shouting, the crash of furniture. Sarah locked the reinforced door, then pulled Emma to the far corner of the room, the 3 remaining dogs forming a protective semicircle around them. "They're buying us time," Emma explained, her voice small but certain. "Daddy trained them for this." Through the window, Sarah could see flashing lights approaching, Sheriff Sullivan and his deputies, but Marcus and his team were already inside the house. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs, followed by angry voices. "The dogs are loose in the neighborhood. Johnson's down. One of those mutts took a chunk out of his leg." "Find the girl," came Marcus's cold command. "She's the one who knows where Whitaker hid the original files." A fist pounded on the office door. "Mrs. Whitaker, we know you're in there. This doesn't have to get messy. We just need the information your husband stole." Commander's growl deepened, his powerful body tensed to spring. Shadow had vanished into the shadows of the room, a trick he'd been named for. Duchess pressed herself protectively against Emma. "The FBI and local sheriff are already here," Sarah called back, trying to keep her voice steady. "You've got nowhere to go. Marcus." A harsh laugh came through the door. "By the time they sort this out, we'll be long gone, with or without you. Your choice if it's the easy way or the hard way." The sound of splintering wood followed as someone began ramming the door. The reinforced frame held, but Sarah knew it wouldn't last forever. Emma suddenly tugged at her sleeve, pointing to the window. "Fire escape," she whispered. Sarah hesitated only a moment before nodding. Bobby had installed the collapsible ladder for exactly this scenario. As she moved to the window, Emma gave another whistle command. Commander immediately positioned himself facing the weakening door, while Shadow slipped toward the window ahead of them. Sarah deployed the ladder and helped Emma out onto it first. As Emma began to descend, Duchess following gracefully, Sarah looked back at Commander, still guarding the door as it began to splinter. "Commander, come," she called desperately. The big shepherd glanced at her but made no move to follow. His purpose clear. He would hold the line. Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she followed Emma down the ladder, understanding with terrible clarity that Bobby had trained these dogs to sacrifice themselves if necessary. At the bottom, Shadow was already scanning the yard, his posture indicating the all clear. Emma led the way toward the side gate, moving with quiet confidence despite the chaos. As they reached the fence, Sheriff Sullivan's voice called out from the front of the house, ordering Marcus and his men to surrender. Gunshots rang out, sending Sarah's heart into her throat. She pulled Emma close, sheltering her daughter's body with her own as they crouched behind a garden shed. A high-pitched yelp of pain from inside the house made Emma stiffen. "That's Commander," she whispered, her voice breaking. Before Sarah could stop her, Emma put her fingers to her lips and gave a sharp, distinctive whistle, different from any pattern Sarah had heard before. The response was immediate and astonishing. From different directions came Scout, Ranger, and Titan, converging on their position with military precision. They must have circled back after leading some of Marcus's men away. "We need to get to Sheriff Sullivan," Sarah said, scanning the yard for the safest path. Emma shook her head. "Not yet. We need to follow the contingency plan." "What contingency plan?" Sarah asked. Bewildered, instead of answering, Emma turned to Ranger, giving a complex series of hand signals that Bobby must have taught her in secret. The dog immediately pressed his nose to the ground, sniffing purposefully before turning toward the woods that bordered their property. "This way," Emma said with quiet authority, starting toward the tree line with the 4 dogs forming a protective diamond around her and Sarah. As they reached the edge of the woods, more gunshots sounded from the house, followed by shouts and the wail of additional sirens. Sarah wanted desperately to look back, to know what was happening to Commander, to see if the sheriff was winning the confrontation. But Emma kept moving forward with unwavering purpose, and Sarah forced herself to focus on keeping up with her daughter. They followed a narrow trail for nearly half a mile, moving deeper into the woods until they reached a small clearing. In the center stood an old hunting cabin that Sarah recognized. It had belonged to Bobby's father, abandoned for years after the old man's death. "Daddy showed me," Emma explained, leading the way to the cabin door. "He said if bad people ever came, I should bring you here." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly well maintained, stocked with non-perishable food, water, first aid supplies, and even a small generator. Bobby had prepared this place as a safe house without ever telling Sarah. "How long have you known about this?" Sarah asked, watching as the dogs took up defensive positions around the cabin. "Since last summer," Emma replied. "Daddy brought me here for camping trips. He taught me and the dogs all the paths through the woods." Sarah sank onto a chair. The full weight of what Bobby had done, the elaborate precautions, the secret training, the contingency plans, finally hitting her. He had known the danger was real, had prepared for every possibility, including his own death. "He tried to tell me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I thought he was being paranoid after his last deployment. I didn't listen. Emma leaned against her mother. He knew you might not understand. That's why he taught me and the dogs in secret. Her small face crumpled suddenly. Commander stayed behind to protect us, just like Daddy did. Sarah pulled her daughter close, both of them seeking comfort in each other's arms as the dogs maintained their vigilant watch. Hours passed with no sign of pursuit. As dusk approached, Sarah began to worry about their next move. The cabin was secure, but they couldn't stay indefinitely. She was considering their options when Shadow, stationed at the front window, suddenly perked up his ears. Sarah tensed, reaching for the hunting rifle Bobby had stored in the cabin. "Emma, get back," she whispered. But Emma was watching Shadow's body language intently. "He's not alarmed," she said. "He's excited." Before Sarah could respond, a distinctive whistle sounded from outside, a pattern she'd heard Emma use with the dogs. Shadow immediately raced to the door, whining with uncharacteristic excitement. Emma's face lit up with hope. "That's Daddy's emergency recall," she exclaimed, rushing to the door despite Sarah's attempt to hold her back. Sarah raised the rifle, her heart pounding as Emma threw open the cabin door. In the gathering twilight stood Sheriff Sullivan, his uniform disheveled and a small cut bleeding on his forehead. Beside him, limping but very much alive, was Commander. "Commander!" Emma cried, dropping to her knees as the injured shepherd limped forward to press his great head against her chest. "He saved my life," Sheriff Sullivan said, his voice gruff with emotion. "One of Marcus's men had me cornered. This dog came out of nowhere." Sarah lowered the rifle, relief flooding through her. "What happened, Marcus?" "In custody," Sullivan confirmed, along with 3 of his associates. One got away, but we've got roadblocks set up. He knelt to check Commander's injury, a bullet graze along his flank. "This boy needs a vet, but he'll be okay. Tough as nails, just like his master, just like his—" As if responding to some unheard command, all 6 dogs suddenly tensed, their attention focused on the path leading deeper into the woods behind the cabin. Sullivan immediately drew his weapon, positioning himself in front of Sarah and Emma. "Stay inside," he ordered, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Someone's coming." The dogs formed a semicircle facing the threat, but their posture puzzled Sarah. They were alert but not aggressive, more like they were awaiting instruction. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the clearing. Shadow took a step forward, then stopped, his tail beginning a slow, hesitant wag. "Sullivan," called a hoarse voice from the darkness. "You got them." "They safe." The sheriff lowered his weapon slightly, squinting into the gathering darkness. "Identify yourself." A figure limped into the clearing, hands raised to show he was unarmed. Even in the dim light, there was something hauntingly familiar about his gaunt frame and careful movements. Commander suddenly broke formation, racing toward the newcomer with a joyful whine, completely at odds with his military training. The other dogs followed, surrounding the man with wiggling bodies and wagging tails. Emma went completely still, her small hand clutching Sarah's with painful intensity. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. As the man stepped fully into the light from the cabin doorway, Sarah's world tilted on its axis, thinner, with a ragged beard and a deep scar running down one side of his face, but unmistakably, impossibly alive. Bobby Whitaker had come home. Sarah Whitaker couldn't breathe. The world narrowed to a single impossible point, the gaunt figure standing at the edge of the clearing, surrounded by joyful dogs. Her husband, Bobby, alive. Emma broke free from her grasp, sprinting toward her father with a cry that contained months of grief and longing. Bobby dropped painfully to one knee. His arms opening to receive his daughter as commander circled them both, whining with unrestrained joy. "How?" Sheriff Sullivan stammered, his weathered face reflecting Sarah's own shock. "We found your boat, the blood." Bobby held Emma tightly against his chest, his eyes meeting Sarah's over their daughter's head. The apology and pain in his gaze kept Sarah frozen in the cabin doorway, unable to move toward the ghost who had returned to them. "It wasn't safe to come back," Bobby said, his voice rougher than Sarah remembered. "They had people everywhere, law enforcement, military contacts. I had to make them believe I was dead." His arms tightened around Emma. "I never wanted to leave you. Ladybug. Never." Sheriff Sullivan holstered his weapon, moving closer to examine Bobby with disbelieving eyes. "You've been alive this whole time, watching from a distance while your family grieved?" A shadow of anguish crossed Bobby's scarred face. "I was captured the night of the accident. The Foundation had been tracking me for weeks. They took me to a private compound outside Richmond." His hand unconsciously moved to the scar on his face. "They wanted to know where I'd hidden the original evidence, who I'd shared it with." "But you escaped," Emma said, looking up at her father with absolute faith. 2 months ago," Bobby confirmed, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face with trembling fingers. "I've been watching the house since then, trying to determine if it was safe to contact you." His eyes found Sarah's again. "They had surveillance on you. If I'd come home, they would have killed all of us." Sarah finally found her voice, though it emerged as little more than a whisper. "You let us think you were dead." Bobby carefully disentangled himself from Emma and stood, wincing as he put weight on his clearly injured leg. "Sarah, Scout!" Emma suddenly cried out, noticing that the smallest shepherd had collapsed at the edge of the clearing. The dog's breathing was labored, a dark stain spreading across his light fur. Bobby was at the dog's side in an instant, his trained hands moving over Scout's body with gentle efficiency. "Gunshot wound," he said grimly. "He must have been hit during the confrontation at the house and followed us on pure adrenaline." "We need to get him to a vet," Sarah said, medical training overriding her emotional turmoil as she knelt beside them. "No time," Bobby replied. "He's losing too much blood." He looked at Sheriff Sullivan. "First aid kit in the cabin red box under the bed." As Sullivan hurried to retrieve it, Bobby stroked Scout's head, whispering something that made the dog's tail thump weakly against the ground. Emma pressed against her father's side, tears streaming down her face. "He was the first one I trained," Bobby told her softly. "The smallest, but the bravest. He always wanted to prove himself." Sarah watched the tenderness in Bobby's scarred hands as he worked to save the dog. The same hands that had prepared secret hideouts and trained protection dogs without her knowledge. Hands that had written letters and created codes rather than simply telling her the truth. Love and anger warred within her, neither gaining the upper hand. Sheriff Sullivan returned with the medical kit, and Bobby worked quickly to extract the bullet and stop the bleeding. His movements were practiced. Sarah realized with a chill that he had likely treated similar wounds on himself during his months in hiding. "Will he be okay?" Emma asked, her voice small and frightened. Bobby didn't offer false reassurance. "I don't know. Ladybug. He's lost a lot of blood." As if understanding the gravity of the moment, the other 5 dogs formed a circle around their fallen packmate, Commander resting his great head on Scout's side, a low whine emanating from his throat. Sarah finally moved toward her husband, kneeling across from him as he worked on the injured dog. "I should have known," she said softly. "The dogs, they never believed you were gone. Commander would sit for hours, staring at the lake where they found your boat." Bobby's hands stilled momentarily. "They were my insurance policy. I knew if anything happened to me, they would protect you both. I trained them to recognize certain people as threats, to understand specific patterns of behavior." His voice broke slightly. "I never thought I'd have to activate those protocols." "How did you know Marcus would come?" Sheriff Sullivan asked, maintaining a watchful eye on the surrounding woods. "Because I fed him false information before my accident," Bobby explained, applying a pressure bandage to Scout's wound. "I told him the original evidence was hidden at the house, that only Emma knew the location. It was a test of loyalty. And he failed it." Sarah processed this new information, a horrible realization dawning. "You used our daughter as bait." Bobby's head snapped up, his eyes fierce. "I gave her guardians. 6 of the best trained protection dogs in the country, and I watched every single day, ready to intervene if they somehow got past the dogs." "But you didn't intervene," Sarah countered, her voice rising with renewed anger. "Not when the school threatened to call animal control. Not when strange men came to our door. Not when your daughter cried herself to sleep every night for months." Emma's small voice interrupted their brewing argument. "He couldn't. Mom. He was making sure the bad people were caught." She looked up at her father with complete understanding. "That's why you trained the dogs to bring us here if something happened. So you could protect us without letting the bad people know you were alive." Bobby's eyes filled with tears as he nodded. "You always were too smart for your own good. Ladybug." Scout stirred beneath Bobby's hands, a weak whimper escaping him. For a moment, the tension between Sarah and Bobby was set aside as they both focused on the injured dog. "Easy, boy," Bobby murmured, gently checking the bandage. "You did good. Rest now." The dog's eyes found Emma, who moved closer to stroke his soft ears. "You saved us. Scout," she whispered. "Just like Daddy taught you." Sheriff Sullivan cleared his throat. "We should move soon. Marcus is in custody, but one of his men is still out there, and this location may be compromised." Bobby nodded grimly. "There's a vehicle hidden about half a mile east of here. 4-wheel drive, fully stocked." At Sarah's questioning look, he added, "Another contingency plan." As Bobby carefully lifted Scout into his arms, Sarah was struck by the painful dichotomy of the moment her husband returned from the dead, cradling an injured dog who had been willing to die to protect her daughter. Just as Bobby had been, the anger that had sustained her began to crack, revealing the raw grief and love beneath it. The small procession moved deeper into the woods, Bobby leading despite his injured leg, Scout cradled against his chest. The remaining 5 dogs maintained a protective formation around them, Commander occasionally ranging ahead to scout the path. Emma walked close to her father, as if afraid he might disappear again if she let him out of her sight. Sarah followed a few steps behind, her emotions too complex to name. "I need to know everything," she said finally, breaking the tense silence. "No more secrets. Bobby, no more half-truths and contingency plans I'm not aware of." Bobby glanced back at her, his face vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen before his death. "Everything," he agreed quietly. "But some of it's going to be hard to hear." "Try me," Sarah challenged, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I buried you 6 months ago. I've been a single mother to our traumatized daughter while fighting the entire town over your paranoid security measures. I think I can handle the truth." A shadow crossed Bobby's face as he adjusted Scout's weight in his arms. "The Foundation isn't just a rogue humanitarian organization, Sarah. It has connections at the highest levels of government. What I uncovered in Afghanistan—" He broke off, glancing meaningfully at Emma. Sarah understood. Some revelations would have to wait until their daughter wasn't listening. As they reached the hidden vehicle, a nondescript SUV with tinted windows, Sarah realized that her husband's return brought as many questions as answers. Bobby Whitaker had risen from the dead, but the danger that had taken him from them was still very much alive. The dogs loaded into the vehicle with practiced efficiency. Scout carefully laid across the back seat with Emma beside him, her small hand resting protectively on his side, as Bobby prepared to drive them to safety. Sarah caught his arm. "Promise me," she said, her voice low and intense. "Promise me you won't disappear again." Bobby's scarred face held a wealth of pain and regret as he covered her hand with his own. "I promise," he whispered. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The safe house was nothing like Sarah had expected. Located 3 hours from Oak Ridge in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the modest cabin appeared abandoned from the outside, with overgrown vegetation and weathered siding. Inside, however, it was clean, well-stocked, and surprisingly comfortable, clearly maintained by someone Bobby trusted. Scout had been stabilized with Bobby's expert care, now resting on a thick blanket near the fireplace, Commander keeping constant vigil beside his injured packmate. The remaining dogs patrolled the perimeter of the property in rotating shifts, a routine they seemed to know by heart. Emma had finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep on a small bed in the corner room, surrounded by Duchess and Titan. Sarah watched her daughter's peaceful face, marveling at her resilience throughout the harrowing journey. Emma had remained steady, following her father's instructions with the calm certainty of someone much older than her 8 years. In the main room, Bobby spread documents across a worn wooden table, while Sheriff Sullivan made secure calls to the FBI agents handling Marcus Reynolds' case. Sarah stood by the window, watching Shadow patrol the tree line, her mind still struggling to reconcile the husband she had mourned with the man who now sat a few feet away. "I think it's time for that explanation," she said finally, turning to face Bobby. "The full version?" Bobby looked up from his papers, exhaustion evident in the lines of his face. The scar that ran from his temple to his jaw looked angry in the cabin's dim light. "Where do you want me to start?" "The beginning," Sarah replied, sitting across from him. "Afghanistan. What you found? Bobby rubbed his hand across his beard, a nervous gesture she remembered from before. It was supposed to be a routine mission. My team was providing security for a Foundation humanitarian shipment. Medical supplies, food, that sort of thing. His eyes darkened with memory. But one of the crates broke during offloading. Instead of medicine, it was filled with next-generation weapons prototypes, the kind that aren't supposed to exist outside classified military facilities. Sheriff Sullivan joined them at the table, his weathered face grim. The Foundation was running weapons to insurgents. Worse, Bobby replied. They were running American weapons to multiple sides of regional conflicts, creating arms races, prolonging wars, all while publicly presenting themselves as peacemakers. He pulled out a weathered notebook. I started documenting shipments, dates, personnel. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. The Foundation has connections in defense contracting, intelligence agencies, even Congress. Why not just report it through official channels? Sarah asked. Bobby's laugh held no humor. I tried. My first attempt was routed to a Foundation operative within military intelligence. That's when the surveillance started. He reached for Sarah's hand across the table. I knew they'd be coming for me, but I thought I had time to get the evidence to the right people. The fishing accident, Sarah said quietly. Bobby nodded. They caught up with me sooner than I expected. 3 men ambushed me at Jefferson Point. I managed to wound 2 of them, but the third got the drop on me. His hand unconsciously moved to his scarred face. They wanted to know where I'd hidden the evidence, who I'd told, when I wouldn't talk. They decided drowning me would look accidental. Sarah flinched at the matter-of-fact way he described his own attempted murder. But you survived. Barely. The boat exploded during the struggle. I think they'd rigged it with explosives as a contingency plan. The blast knocked all of us into the water. Bobby's eyes took on a distant look. I was badly injured, but I managed to swim to the far shore. I knew if I went home, I'd be leading them straight to you and Emma. So you just disappeared, Sarah said, the hurt still raw in her voice. I had no choice. Sarah? Bobby's voice broke slightly. The Foundation doesn't just kill their targets, they eliminate entire families to send a message. I needed them to believe I was dead while I gathered enough evidence to bring them down for good. Sheriff Sullivan leaned forward. And did you gather that evidence? Bobby hesitated, his eyes moving to Commander, who had raised his head from his vigil over Scout. In a manner of speaking, he gave a soft whistle, and Commander immediately padded over to him. Bobby ran his hands methodically over the dog's thick fur, pausing at a spot between his shoulder blades. With practiced fingers, he parted the fur to reveal a small, nearly invisible scar. Microchip, Sheriff Sullivan asked, brows rising in surprise. Bobby nodded. Subcutaneous RFID implant. Military grade, with enough storage for the entire evidence file. He stroked Commander's head fondly. They searched my house, my office, my computers. They never thought to scan my dog. Sarah stared at Commander with new understanding. That's why you were so insistent that the dog stay with Emma. They weren't just protection, they were carrying your insurance policy. Commander has the complete file, Bobby confirmed. The others each carry fragments redundancy in case anything happened to one of them. His voice softened. But, yes, Protection was always the primary purpose. I trained them to recognize Foundation operatives by scent samples I'd collected in Afghanistan. That's why they reacted so strongly to Marcus. Sheriff Sullivan shook his head in amazement. You turned your dogs into a covert intelligence network. I did what was necessary to protect my family and expose the Foundation, Bobby replied without apology. The FBI has been building a case based on the partial evidence I managed to get to them before my accident, but it wasn't enough for indictments. With Commander's data, they can bring down the entire organization. Sarah's mind reeled with the implications. Her husband hadn't just been paranoid. He'd been methodically preparing for a war with a powerful shadow organization, using their daughter and family pets as unwitting operatives in his crusade. "What about Emma?" she asked, her voice hardening. "Did you ever consider what this would do to her? She's 8 years old, Bobby. She shouldn't have to live with this kind of fear, this kind of responsibility." Pain flashed across Bobby's scarred face. "Every single day," he whispered. "I questioned myself every single day. But I knew if the Foundation realized I was alive, they'd use both of you to get to me. The dogs were my compromise, a way to keep Emma safe without bringing her directly into this mess." "Except she was in it anyway," Sarah countered. "Those special commands, the coded messages, the secret cabin visits, you were training her just like you trained the dogs." Before Bobby could respond, a soft sound from the doorway drew their attention. Emma stood there in her rumpled clothes, her blonde hair tangled from sleep. Duchess, a silent shadow beside her. "I asked him to," she said simply. "I knew something was wrong after his last deployment. He was different, always checking the windows, installing new locks." Her small face was solemn with understanding beyond her years. "When he started training the dogs, I wanted to help. I made him teach me, too." Sarah felt her heart breaking at the lost childhood revealed in those quiet words. Bobby rose from his chair, crossing to kneel in front of his daughter despite his injured leg. "I never should have involved you, Ladybug," he said, his voice thick with regret. "That was my mistake." Emma shook her head stubbornly. "You always said knowledge is the best protection. That's why you read me military history instead of bedtime stories." Her chin lifted in a gesture so reminiscent of Bobby that Sarah couldn't help but see the genetic line connecting them. "I'm not scared because I know what to do. The other kids at school, they don't know anything about danger. That's scarier." A pained silence followed Emma's declaration. Sarah watched her husband and daughter, two pieces of the same puzzle, both damaged by the choices Bobby had made, yet bound by an understanding she wasn't entirely part of. Sheriff Sullivan cleared his throat. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow I'll need to coordinate with the FBI task force about extracting that evidence safely." He nodded toward Commander, who had returned to Scout's side. "Given what you've told me, the Foundation will stop at nothing to get those dogs." As if confirming this assessment, Scout whimpered in his sleep, his injured body twitching with remembered trauma. Emma immediately went to him, kneeling beside the injured shepherd with gentle hands. "He's having a nightmare," she said, stroking his fur the way Bobby had taught her. "Just like Daddy used to." The simple observation struck Sarah like a physical blow. How much had Emma noticed over the years? How much had she silently understood while Sarah had tried to maintain a veneer of normalcy? Later, after Emma had fallen asleep again with the dogs arranged protectively around her bed, Sarah found Bobby sitting alone on the cabin's small porch, staring into the darkness. "I can't forgive you yet," she said quietly, sitting beside him. "For letting us believe you were dead. For putting Emma in danger." Bobby nodded, accepting her anger as his due. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to keep you both safe and make the Foundation pay for what they've done." "And after," Sarah asked, "if we survive this, if the Foundation is exposed, what then? Do we just go back to being a normal family in Oak Ridge?" A sad smile crossed Bobby's scarred face. "I don't think normal is in the cards for us anymore. Sarah, too much has happened." He looked toward the cabin where their daughter slept. "But maybe we can build something new, something honest." "No more secrets," Sarah insisted. "No more compartmentalized information or need-to-know basis within our family." "No more secrets," Bobby agreed solemnly. As they sat in silence, Shadow emerged from the darkness, padding silently across the porch to sit at Bobby's feet. The black shepherd's alert posture reminded Sarah that even this moment of connection was taking place within a perimeter of vigilance, the new normal that had become their lives. Inside, Commander suddenly raised his head, ears perked toward the window. A low, warning growl rumbled in his chest. Bobby was on his feet instantly, all trace of exhaustion gone. "Get inside," he ordered, his voice dropping to the commanding tone Sarah hadn't heard since before his disappearance. "Someone's coming." As Sarah hurried back into the cabin, she realized with chilling clarity that the revelation of Bobby's survival had only been the beginning. The true fight for their family's safety and for justice against the Foundation was just about to begin. 3 months later, the Whitaker family stood on the porch of a new home, a modest farmhouse on 5 acres outside of Burlington, Vermont, far from the memories and dangers of Oak Ridge. The autumn leaves had turned the surrounding landscape into a canvas of red and gold, a beauty that still felt surreal after the chaos they had survived. Scout, now fully recovered, romped through the fallen leaves with renewed vigor, his near-death experience seemingly forgotten in the joy of exploration. The other 5 shepherds maintained their protective habits, but with a newfound relaxation to their vigilance, a reflection of the family they guarded. Ms. Marcia, from next door, brought another casserole, Emma announced, returning from the mailbox with Commander at her side. At 9 years old, her birthday celebrated during their transition to this new life, she still carried a seriousness beyond her years, but smiles came more easily now, moments of childish delight breaking through the solemn exterior more frequently. Sarah watched her husband limp down the porch steps to help Emma with the mail. Bobby's physical wounds had largely healed, the scar on his face fading from angry red to a silvery line that Emma claimed made him look like a pirate. The psychological scars ran deeper, evident in his restless sleep and hypervigilance. But those, too, were slowly improving. The night at the mountain cabin had indeed marked the beginning of the final confrontation with the Foundation. Marcus Reynolds' captured associate had led the FBI to a Foundation safe house, while the evidence stored in Commander's microchip had provided the smoking gun needed for high-level indictments. The resulting investigation had sent shockwaves through Washington, with arrests reaching into defense contracting companies, intelligence agencies, and even 2 congressional offices. The Whitakers had spent 6 weeks in protective custody while the case unfolded, the dogs providing both security and comfort during endless debriefings and testimony preparations. Bobby's resurrection had complicated matters legally explaining why he had faked his death rather than going to authorities, but his extensive evidence and the attempt on his family's life ultimately vindicated his actions. Now, under new identities provided by the Witness Security Program, they were building a life that balanced vigilance with normalcy. Bobby worked remotely as a security consultant. Sarah had found a position at the local hospital. Emma attended a small private school where, for the first time since her father's death, she wasn't followed by 6 German shepherds, though Commander still accompanied her, now officially registered as a service animal. Final tally from Ms. Eleanor, Bobby said, holding up a letter as he and Emma returned to the porch. Eleanor Jenkins, their elderly neighbor from Oak Ridge, and one of the few people who knew their new location, had appointed herself their correspondent with their old community. "What's the gossip this time?" Sarah asked, making room for Bobby on the porch swing. The Thompson boy, Billy, organized a dog appreciation club at school. Bobby read, a smile tugging at his lips. Apparently, he credits our pack with inspiring him to overcome his fear of large breeds. Emma beamed. I told him Duchess was the gentlest one. Remember when she let him pet her at recess? Sarah nodded, remembering the shy boy who had been one of Emma's few friends in those difficult months. And what about Principal Patterson? Bobby's smile widened. Transferred to an administrative position at the district office. Eleanor says there's a petition circulating to name the new playground Whitaker Park in recognition of our family's extraordinary service to the community. Debbie. They don't even know the half of it, Sarah murmured, thinking of the classified aspects of the Foundation case that would remain sealed for decades. The 6 dogs suddenly perked up their ears, turning toward the long driveway. Moments later, the sound of an approaching vehicle confirmed their alert. Bobby tensed momentarily. Old habits died hard, but relaxed when Sheriff Sullivan's familiar truck came into view. Frank Sullivan, who had taken early retirement after the events in Oak Ridge, had become one of their few regular visitors, serving as both a connection to their past and a partner in processing all they had experienced. "Uncle Frank," Emma called, racing down the steps to meet him as he parked, the dogs forming their habitual semicircle around her. Sullivan emerged from his truck with a wide grin, a fishing rod in one hand and a bakery box in the other. "Thought I'd see if your dad wants to try the bass fishing at Lake Champlain," he called. "And I brought your mom's favorite cinnamon rolls." As the men discussed fishing prospects and Sarah examined the pastries, Emma slipped away to the large oak tree at the edge of the yard, Commander faithfully at her side. From her pocket, she withdrew a small notebook, a diary of sorts, where she recorded her observations and memories. "They're happy today," she wrote, glancing back at her parents laughing with Sheriff Sullivan on the porch. "Mom doesn't flinch when Dad touches her anymore. Dad slept through the night twice this week." Commander rested his great head against her knee, his intelligent eyes watching her with understanding that sometimes still gave Sarah chills. The bond between Emma and the dogs remained profound, though different now that the immediate danger had passed. They were protectors still, but also companions in healing. Later that evening, after Sullivan had departed with promises to return for fishing the next morning, the family gathered in the living room. The television news briefly mentioned another arrest connected to the Foundation case. A former military contractor extradited from South America. Bobby reached for the remote, turning off the report. "Enough of that," he said quietly. "Movie night." It was a new tradition they had established, Friday evenings dedicated to childhood classics Emma had missed during the tumultuous past year. Sarah brought popcorn from the kitchen while Emma arranged pillows on the floor, creating the nest where she and the dogs would inevitably end up. As The Wizard of Oz began to play, Sarah found herself studying her family instead of the screen. Bobby, still alert, but increasingly present in these quiet moments. Emma, curled between Duchess and Titan, her small hand absently stroking Scout's healed flank. The other dogs arranged in their customary positions around the room, guardians at rest but never fully off duty. They were changed, all of them, by the crucible they had survived. The innocence of their life in Oak Ridge was gone forever, replaced by a hard-won wisdom about danger and sacrifice. But something new had emerged from those ashes, a family forged by fire, bound not just by blood, but by shared survival. Outside, autumn leaves drifted past the windows as darkness fell. Inside, surrounded by 6 loyal shepherds, the Whitakers continued their most important mission, learning to live again. Commander lifted his head suddenly, ears perked toward the window, but after a moment he relaxed, settling back against Emma's side with a contented sigh. Just the wind in the trees. For tonight, at least. They were safe. "I love you," Bobby said quietly to Sarah, his scarred hand finding hers in the flickering television light. "I know," she replied, the simple acknowledgement containing all the complex emotions of their journey, the anger and betrayal gradually giving way to understanding and, finally, forgiveness. On the floor, Emma had fallen asleep, surrounded by her guardians, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for over a year. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in their healing process, new adjustments to their altered reality. But tonight, in this moment, the family that had nearly been destroyed by secrets had found their way back to each other, different, damaged, but ultimately unbroken. And the 6 German shepherds, their extraordinary mission accomplished, kept watch, still not out of duty now, but out of love. When Emma Whitaker walks to school surrounded by 6 German shepherds, folks in Oak Ridge whisper behind their hands. But those who've lived long enough know that protection comes in many forms, and family bonds can survive even the darkest storms. Bobby Whitaker's decision to train those dogs before his death wasn't paranoia. It was the desperate love of a father who would move heaven and earth to keep his child safe. Remember when we raised our own children in a simpler world, before we had to worry about the dangers lurking in every shadow? The world has changed, but a parent's devotion remains the same. This story reminds us that the most powerful legacy we leave isn't in our possessions or achievements, but in the measures we take to protect those we love long after we're gone, like Commander keeping his silent vigil at Emma's bedside.